Hi, Reddit. I'm 20 years old, and honestly, I feel like my whole life just got hit by a bus. I'm a student trying to work my way through a decent state university, which is already a struggle since my dad passed away a few years ago. Everything financial fell onto my mom, Sarah, and while she's usually a good person, she has this thing for instant gratification. When dad died, he left a life insurance payout, most of which was specifically earmarked for my college education, sitting in a separate investment account he'd set up for me. It wasn't a colossal amount, but it was enough to cover the rest of my tuition and keep me from drowning in student loans. I checked the balance religiously. It was my safety net, my promise from him. Then about 2 months ago, Mom came home beaming, talking about how she needed a break and was going on a life-changing spiritual retreat in Southeast Asia for 3 weeks. I was surprised but happy for her. She deserved a vacation. I remember asking about the money, half jokingly, and she gave me this overly serious look, saying, "Don't worry, honey, it's untouched. I'd never touch your money. It's safe." Everything felt normal until I got a notification a few days after she left, an email from the bank saying there had been a large transfer that flagged their system as unusual activity. I tried to log into the education account myself, but the password had been mysteriously changed, locking me out completely. I messaged Mom, asking what was up, but I only got spotty replies about the poor Wi-Fi and how she was meditating. I had this cold, sick feeling in my stomach, the kind where you know something is wrong, but you're desperately hoping you're just being paranoid. That feeling only got worse when the bank finally called me back. The call from the bank was short and clinical, but it hit me like a physical blow. The representative confirmed that the entire balance of the educational investment account, every single penny Dad had set aside, had been liquidated and transferred in one lump sum, just days before Mom flew out. I felt the air leave my lungs. I kept stammering, trying to find a logical explanation, but the facts were undeniable. The money, my future, was gone. When Mom finally decided to call me back, she sounded breezy, completely disconnected from the disaster she'd caused. I skipped the small talk and just demanded to know where the money was. There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the line, and then she started crying, a desperate, fake-sounding sob. She claimed that she'd been scammed. A terrible investment opportunity that promised quick returns to help me pay for school had gone completely sideways, and the money had vanished into thin air. She kept repeating how sorry she was, saying she only wanted to help, that she'd try to get a loan when she got back. I felt a sharp mix of fury and intense disappointment. She wasn't just admitting to touching the money she swore she wouldn't. She was using a ridiculous cover story. I knew my mom. She loves expensive things, but she isn't easily fooled by email scams. The timing, the immediate trip, and the changed password all screamed calculated action, not a hapless mistake. I told her I didn't believe her, and that I needed proof of this scam, or I was going to contact the police. She hung up on me immediately after that, and the pit in my stomach deepened. I knew the truth was much closer to her spiritual retreat than to any investment fraud, but I needed something concrete to prove it. I needed to see what she'd actually spent the money on. I spent the next few days feeling totally numb. I couldn't focus on my classes, and the stress of potentially having to drop out because the money was gone was suffocating. I decided I wasn't going to just wait for Mom to get back and spin another lie. I needed to become a detective. I started with the shared computer at home, digging through her browser history and old email backups. She was usually careful, but she always saved important documents to a specific folder on the desktop, a habit Dad used to tease her about. It took me hours, but I found what I was looking for, tucked away in a folder labeled Taxes 2024, which was clearly a distraction label. Inside were dozens of files, not tax forms, but confirmation emails and receipts. The first few were for the retreat. Sure, the $5,000 for the actual program was there, which was already a lot, but I kept scrolling. Then came the shockers. First-class plane tickets, not economy like she claimed, totaling nearly $8,000 for the round trip. A 5-star resort booking for 3 extra days before the retreat started. And then, the real kicker. A detailed itinerary for a private guided tour of 3 ancient temples, which included a personal photographer and a luxury bespoke dining experience at over $15,000. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure betrayal. This wasn't a spiritual retreat. It was a luxury splurge, funded entirely by the money Dad had saved for me. Her claims of a scam were a complete fabrication. She didn't lose the money. She spent it, all while telling me I was paranoid. The total expenditure she planned out was nearly the exact figure that had vanished from my account. I had the proof now, undeniable documentation that showed she had systematically emptied my educational fund to pay for the vacation of a lifetime. The immediate question wasn't if she did it anymore, but what I was going to do with this overwhelming, painful evidence when she finally returned. The sheer audacity of it all was what really broke me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just profoundly sad and disappointed. The entire time she was texting me about her humbling experience and how she was connecting with nature, she knew she was walking on the money Dad specifically wanted me to have. I felt sick knowing she was sending me pictures of beautiful temples while I was having anxiety attacks trying to figure out how to pay my next tuition bill. I briefly considered sending her the receipts right there, while she was still on her luxury bender, but something held me back. I wanted her to come home and face me, to look me in the eye and repeat the lie about the scam before I laid out the cold, hard proof. I realized this wasn't just about the money. It was about the breach of trust that felt irreparable. She hadn't just taken savings. She had taken Dad's legacy for me and treated it like a bonus check for a vacation. I started talking to my Aunt Carol, Dad's sister, who lives a few states away. I didn't tell her everything immediately, just that there was a major financial issue and I was worried about Mom's spending habits. Aunt Carol was instantly concerned. She had always been the financially responsible one in the family. She suggested I go back to the bank and see if there was any chance of reversing the transfer, or at least getting a full transaction history. She also promised to look into some legal aid options for me. Getting that advice from a relative felt like the first time I could breathe in weeks, like maybe I wasn't totally alone in fighting this overwhelming situation. But the fear of what was coming when Mom got off the plane was starting to take over. I knew confronting her was going to be an explosion, and I didn't know if I was ready for the fallout. A few days before Mom was due back, I went through all the receipts one last time, printing out the most damning ones and compiling them into a single neat folder. I felt like I was preparing a legal case, not a conversation with my own mother. The whole situation was surreal. While doing a final check of the file names on the computer, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. One of the flight confirmation emails had a slightly different format than the others. I clicked on it, and it turned out to be a confirmation for 2 seats, not one. The second passenger was listed only by initials, JM. My heart started racing again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was confusion mixing with a fresh wave of suspicion. Who was JM? Mom hadn't mentioned anyone going with her. She explicitly said this was a solo, soul-searching journey. I dug around the computer again, focusing my search on recent messages and social media activity. It didn't take long. Buried in the junk folder of her email was a thread between her and a man I vaguely recognized, Jeff, a divorced guy from her book club. The emails weren't romantic or anything, but they detailed meeting points, packing lists, and coordinated travel plans. He was traveling with her. The scam story was bad enough, but realizing she had lied about the trip being solitary, that she had actually taken a secret companion on a trip funded by my college savings, added a whole new layer of betrayal. She wasn't just selfish. She was deceptive on a massive scale. This wasn't a spiritual journey. It was a luxury vacation with a guy she was trying to impress. The sheer depth of the lies made me physically ill. I updated Aunt Carol immediately, and she sounded furious, saying this dramatically changed the situation. She told me to lock the evidence away and prepare for the confrontation because Mom was going to try and gaslight me the minute she walked through the door. I knew then I couldn't just have a talk with her. I had to execute a plan. Mom was due to land early Saturday morning. I spent Friday night moving some of my essential documents and anything of value, including my dad's old watch, into a safe deposit box I'd quietly rented down the street. It sounds extreme, but the trust was completely shattered, and I wasn't taking any chances. Aunt Carol had called earlier and advised me to keep my cards close to my chest when Mom arrived. Don't confront her immediately, she said. Let her settle in, and let her try to spin her story first. When she finally walked through the door, she looked fantastic. Tanned, rested, wearing new, expensive-looking jewelry she definitely didn't own before she left. She gave me a tight hug, talking a mile a minute about the cleansing power of the trip and how much she had needed this clarity. Then she hit me with the lie, just as I knew she would. She sat me down, sighed dramatically, and launched into the sad tale of the international investment fraud, complete with hand gestures about the shady foreign brokers who stole her good intentions. She said she was absolutely devastated and promised, tears welling up in her eyes, that she would work 2 jobs to replace the money. I just watched her, completely silent, letting her finish the performance. The acting was so good, the emotions so convincing, that if I hadn't seen the receipts, I might have actually believed her. But knowing the truth made her whole display feel disgusting. She was banking on my naivety and grief to get away with it. When she finished, expecting me to comfort her, I simply pulled the file folder out from behind my back and dropped it on the coffee table. The thud of the paper on the wood seemed deafeningly loud, and the silence that followed was heavy with dread. Her face went from tearful sorrow to stone-cold panic in an instant. I hadn't said a single word, but she knew, absolutely knew, that I had all the answers she was desperately trying to hide. She stared at the folder, then at me, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The panic in her eyes confirmed everything I already knew. I didn't yell or raise my voice. I just spoke in a low, flat tone that was perhaps more frightening than a scream. I told her I knew about the first-class tickets, the 5-star resorts, the private temple tours, and the full amount, down to the last dollar, that had been transferred from my educational account. Then I watched her face completely fall when I mentioned JM, the companion she'd pretended didn't exist. The transformation was immediate and chilling. The tears vanished, and the remorseful mother was replaced by someone cold and defensive. She immediately went on the attack, accusing me of spying on her, of invading her privacy, and of being ungrateful for all she had supposedly done for me. She tried to snatch the folder, but I pulled it back. She actually had the nerve to argue that Dad's money was technically hers to manage until I turned 21, and that she was just borrowing it for a much-needed mental health break. She said I was being dramatic, and that she'd pay it back eventually. The sheer entitlement radiating off her was overwhelming. I realized in that moment that I wasn't dealing with a person who made a mistake. I was dealing with a person who felt zero remorse for systematically deceiving and damaging her own child's future. I told her simply that her lies were over and that I had already talked to a lawyer. That sentence was the trigger. She started shouting, saying I was ruining her life and that Dad would be ashamed of me. I looked at the receipts again, the evidence of her selfish luxury trip laid out clearly, and I stood up. I told her I was moving out that night and that she should expect contact from Aunt Carol's legal referral. She looked stunned, finally realizing the gravity of the consequences she was facing. I felt a tremendous wave of exhaustion, but also a strange sense of clarity. I knew leaving was the only way to save myself. The confrontation was exactly as explosive as I feared, and when I told her I was leaving, she initially laughed, thinking it was an empty threat. But the laughter died when she saw me dragging my suitcase and the box of Dad's things toward the front door an hour later. She followed me, begging, pleading, then quickly switching back to accusations, saying I was abandoning her just like Dad had abandoned us. That comparison was the lowest blow, and it cemented my decision. I didn't engage. I just walked out and drove straight to Aunt Carol's place, which was a 5-hour drive away, but felt like the only safe harbor left. Aunt Carol was amazing. She confirmed everything with the lawyer she'd lined up, and the lawyer explained that while Dad's intention for the funds was clear, the way the account was set up gave Mom power over the money until I reached a certain age. It was messy, complicated, and a long legal battle would likely cost more than we would recover, especially if Mom was determined to drag it out. However, the lawyer also suggested a very direct, non-legal pressure tactic. I didn't want to sue my own mother, but I absolutely refused to let her get away with it. I decided to make the proof public. I created a detailed document outlining the transfer dates, the scam story, and the corresponding receipts for the luxury trip with Jeff, all the evidence I had neatly printed. I didn't post it on social media, but I sent it in a mass email to all the relatives on both sides of the family, including Mom's siblings and Dad's closest friends, along with a polite but firm explanation of why I was moving out and cutting contact. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Mom started getting calls instantly, and the shame must have been overwhelming. The last communication I received was a desperate, angry text from her saying I had ruined her reputation and destroyed our family. But I knew the truth. She destroyed the family the moment she prioritized a first-class vacation with a secret boyfriend over her only child's future. I haven't heard from her since that text, and I've blocked her number. Aunt Carol is helping me look for campus housing and applying for emergency scholarships to cover this year. I'm working double shifts, and it's going to be brutal, but I feel lighter. I lost the money, but I saved myself from a lifetime of her manipulation and lies. It was a massive financial setback, but finally being free of her toxic entitlement feels like the biggest win of all.